Hi friends. Today I'm going to paint this little pumpkin piece because I had created a short, which is this sped up version of the videos that are real time, and a number of you wanted to see me paint it. So I'm going to paint it again for you. And I will also give you the link to, if you'd like the kit, which I've been making, which are really great. I wish I would have had these when I was taking these classes in college. They would have been really helpful. I always went up after the class and I'd stare at my teacher's paintings and write down the colors she was using. And this was before the days of Google and online and phones with, you could take pictures. So I hope these are helping you guys. You're ordering quite a few of them, and I'm hoping you're really enjoying them. So what you will get in the kit is this drawing that you can just print out. They're $5, and you just download them, upload them, and you print them out, and you can trace these using a light box or maybe some carbon paper. And I'm also going to give you the colors that I use for these, and any instructions that might help. And then you can come back and watch the video, and hopefully they will give you a little bit more clarity on how to do these. As far as supplies today, I'm going to use my 6 Velvet Touch Princeton and possibly my 8. You could also use your Degatos, which are just fine. I've shared those with you. They're a great little beginner brush. You get a whole set for, I think, $12. The Princetons are about $8 each. So if you don't want to buy a whole set of these, you can get those Degatos and kind of play with those. So those are going to be what I'm using. I've got my MeiLang palette, which I love. Such a great beginner palette. All the colors are mixed for you. Mixing colors can be a little bit overwhelming for beginners. So that's a great little palette. And then this is my mixing palette, which I love Meeden. I have a number of their palettes. They're easy for me to hold. I like big mixing wells. So these are nice big wells I can mix my paints in. And I've got my Artisto paper, which I talk about a lot. It's such a great student grade paper. I don't always paint on arches, especially for my daily painting. And these are just perfect. They hold up to water. They're a great affordable price, and they've got some really good texture. So that's what I'm using today. Normally, I use their pads, which come on these rings. I have piles and piles of these, and I label them for spring, summer, fall. I use them for practices and creating these little color boards, and then I come back and refer to these. So they're really great little pads. Again, they have some great texture. I will link those for you. And I think that's about it. I've got my 2 wells of water, one to wash, one to rinse, as you know is really important with watercolors because they're so transparent. So I'm going to fill that up right now. And then I've got a towel to blot my brush off. And there we go. These, I'm telling you, for years for my water wells, I used little mason jars and things, which is great. But I can't tell you how many times I dumped them over, and that was kind of disastrous, as you could imagine. So I'm loving these beautiful ceramic Meeden water wells. They were sold out a while ago, I noticed, but I think they got them back in. So I will link that for you. And I just got blue paint on there. That's okay. All right. So today, getting my 8 Velvet Touch round. Let's go ahead and start. I'm going to be using a lot of wet and wet today. I want to get this really nice, pretty washes. I will leave some white space here and there. And I did a tutorial the other day on drawing these little leaves. So I'll link that in here if you want to go back to that, and it'll give you a little bit of insight on drawing these big oak or fall leaves, or even these pumpkin leaves that are kind of big. And I like to use guidelines when I'm drawing. It gives me a little bit better grasp on the structure and the shape of things. So I use this technique also for my flowers. So I'll link that for you. All right, so let's go ahead and start. We're gonna start, I'm using Cad Yellow today, Cad Orange, which is the same in MeiLang and Winsor Newton. I'm also going to be using my favorite green, which is a sap and an olive green. I kind of mix together. I'll put a little burnt sienna in there. I see here I have just a touch of some Cad Yellow. So just play with the colors, kind of make them your own. And let's start first with our Cad Yellow. Let me pick up a little bit more of that. Make sure when you're going into your paints too, friends, this is for beginners, that if you see little holes in your paints, that means you're going in with the tip of your brush. And we don't want to do that because that can really damage the tip of our brush, and then we can't get those beautiful little fine lines. So make sure when you're loading your brush, you're using the side of your brush, and also making sure you're not loading the paint all the way up to the ferrule, because that can also ruin your brush. If you get paint up in there, it'll eventually make all your bristles kind of stick out and not fun. All right, so I've got my Cad Yellow in here. It's a pretty watery consistency, a medium value, meaning it's got about equal 50% water, 50% paint. I actually want a little lighter value, so I'm going to add a little bit more water to get a lighter value. What I do quite often is I have little sheets of paper so I can see the value that I'm getting. And I really do my best to incorporate all the values of a color, at least 3 different ones. So I've got a light, a medium, and a dark. And at the end of your picture, you can hold that up and make sure you've got all these different values, because that's going to give you a lot of depth and interest in your paintings. That's usually how I can tell my more beginner paintings when I look way back, is they're all the same value, so they just don't have that interest. All right, let's go ahead and pick up some of that paint. I made a mess here with some of that water, and just creating this glaze. And this is with the Cad Yellow. So I'm not putting down too much water. I don't want puddles and so forth. I just want a shine. So let's just keep going. And as you see here, I'm varying the values. So some of these values are a little darker, and some of the values are a little bit lighter. And that's really what I wanted. The other thing too is now I'm going in and I'm doing this a little bit rapidly. So you want to make sure that, because I'm working wet and wet, I want to make sure that I either work quick enough that I can get in there and drop in some of my other colors while it's wet, or just do one segment at a time, okay? That way it doesn't dry before you can drop in your other colors. So I went ahead and did 3 segments at first, because I kind of know I can get in there and work quick enough. But if you're not sure, just do 1 segment at a time. So I'm going to wash and rinse my brush. Tap it off a bit, and let's keep going. If you'd like to, make sure you leave these white spaces, and that kind of shows the curvature of the pumpkin. And I'm going to pick up a little bit more of my paint, go into the next one here, and I'm not touching the segment next to it. Now I'm going to go in and pick up a tiny bit of that orange, drop that in while it's wet. There we go. And because this is kind of behind the leaf, I'm going to maybe make this a little bit darker down in here. And then let's just let that be, aside from, I want to put a little bit of brown. You can use burnt sienna, burnt umber, whatever brown you would like. Maybe even mix a brown with a little bit of green for that stem. And I want to go in with just the tip of my brush. If you notice for these segments, because they're wider, I used the side of my brush, holding my brush horizontal, resting my wrist on my paper. I can't paint holding my hand up. My hand would be too shaky. So I rest the side of my hand on my paper, and then I move my entire hand across. So going in here, while this is wet, I'm going to go ahead and just light pressure, use the tip of my brush. And I want this to kind of spread into my orange. I'm perfectly okay with that. So going in with maybe even a tiny bit of that brown green and touching in here so we get some of that coming out from the pumpkin. Now, if you get too much, like this right here, I can dry off my brush and just pick a little bit back up. No worries. Or you can pull it out. Now, I wouldn't go into this too much more, because if this is dry and you're going in with wet, I mean, if this is damp, the orange segments, and you go in with that wet paint, they're different wetnesses and it's going to create those blooms. So I'm going to leave this to dry right now. Might just add a tiny bit of water here. There we go. All right, let's go into our next pumpkin, and I'm going to start again with that yellow light value. Remember to get your paper swatch out and see, because we can always go darker. It's much harder to go lighter. And using the side of my brush and the tip, getting some of that definition as I move around that leaf, just like that. And you can even leave some white space in between the segments, but I'm really being aware of not just using the exact same value of that yellow or orange in every single segment. Now, before that gets dry, I want to go in with my orange and just start dropping in so we get some of that interest. And maybe down here where it's under the leaves, I might even drop in some orange, just like that. Right over here, because maybe that's a little bit shadowed. So there you go. Now, I don't normally like hard edges like this, but I think here it's kind of appropriate. Now I just lifted a little bit of that. So I used a dry brush, by the way, and just went in and picked up a little. So there we go. Maybe add in a tiny bit of, let's get a little bit darker orange and see if we can set that in here. Yeah, that looks nice. I like that. So I'm trying to create, you know, three somewhat individual little pumpkins here, so they're not all the same color. And they have each of their own unique style. This one's tall and thin. This one's kind of chunkier. This one's kind of chunky too, I suppose. And let's move on to another segment here. Now I've got a little bit too much water there. If you're not sure, you can always tap off on your towel, and that will get rid of a lot of that excess water you might have. And then I just continue around, just creating these fun little pumpkin segments here. And keeping in mind, just trying to keep a little bit of that white space. Now I'm going to go in with some of that orange. There we go. And the beauty of watercolor, I think, is just being able to kind of picking up a little bit of brown here, because this will be shadowed. You know, just let the watercolors kind of do the work for you. I'm shadowing this with a little bit of that brown and green because it's under the leaf. So just using the very tip of my brush, just a tiny bit. Now if I have too much of a hard edge there, I can wash and rinse my brush so it's damp and just use that push and pull technique, just feathering it out like that. And there we go. Okay. So I think that's quite nice. These are some leaves. Let's go ahead and create our stem there using just the tip of my brush. So I just tapped into my paint, which I added, by the way, whenever I'm using greenery, I always incorporate the color of the flower or the pumpkin. So in this case, I'm picking up a tiny bit of that orange and going to mix it with my green. I just think it brings this kind of unity and flow and coherence. So when I do the stem, it has the undertones of the pumpkin in it. It's not completely a separate color. So there we go. I quite like that. Just tapping in here. Create some of that shadow. Maybe even a little bit darker down here. Like that. And there we go. So we still have a little bit of that middle pumpkin. I'm going to wash and rinse my brush. Pick up a little bit of that yellow glaze. I love working with glazes in my watercolors. I had a little bit too much water on there, so just tapped it off. And the beauty of glazes is, so right now that's my first coat. When I lay the orange on top, it's still going to have that undertone of yellow. I think Emma Lefebvre, she just did a wonderful video, and I believe, I didn't totally watch it, but she first painted it with the blue, and that gave this illusion of shadows, and then she coated over it with her oranges, and I thought that was really pretty, and I do that a lot myself. So I'm lifting a little bit of that color with just a damp brush. And I really want to make those back segments a little bit darker. And so what I'll do is once that dries, I'll go over it and put another glaze. Let's go ahead and move on to our last pumpkin here. Pick up some of that yellow paint. Point, and then using the side of my brush, remembering to leave some white space. You could even leave white space in between the segments. So instead of drawing those lines, I do that with leaves a lot too. Instead of drawing that vein or drawing this segment, I might just leave it white. Pick up a tiny bit of orange. And add that in, maybe some of that orange and green down here, like that. Wash and rinse my brush. Whoop. and just pull that out. If this is all wet, it will probably blend on its own. So look at how beautiful. So interesting. We can create that wonderful shadow. And let's keep going. Pick up some more of that yellow. Remembering, having in your mind already, you want to leave that white space. So I've left it right here to kind of show a round shininess. And then some of that orange while it's wet, and dropping that in. With wet and wet, you do have to work a little bit quickly because you want to be dropping in while it's wet. The way you get those kind of funky blooms sometimes is because, oh, I missed part of our pumpkin down here. Because you're going into paint with wetter paint than what you're going into. And what happens is the wetter paint stops and it creates a wall. So you want to go into this with the same wetnesses, the same dampness. Now I'm going to pick up some of that orange and green. And this part of the pumpkin is a little bit underneath everything. So to me, it would have that shading again, like that. There we go. All right. I like that. I might just grab a tiny bit more of that cad orange. Get it so it's real movable. So if I turn my palette, these paints are moving. That's the kind of consistency I like. And we have a few more segments, so I'm going to pick up some more of that yellow, cad yellow. Got a drip there. And keeping in mind, now the back, I probably won't leave any whites, but maybe on that one I can. And then picking up some of that yellow. You could even add blues into your pumpkin, although keep in mind that if you mix blue in with your pumpkin, it's going to create that more shadowy look. So there we go. I might do something like that. Making the back segments a little bit darker. And I'm going to do the same over here because those are in the back. So they're going to have kind of this shadow across them. There we go. Now watercolors always dry just a bit lighter, so I'm putting down these green colors, but they're going to come dry much lighter. Now I don't like hard lines, so I will go in with just a damp rinsed brush, and you could either do that push and pull feathering or just pulling it out like that. I want to add a little bit of that dark green down here because this is in the shadow of this leaf. So again, I'm glazing, and when I glaze, I've got this shadowy green color, but the orange is really showing up underneath it. And that's just, again, what I love about watercolors, because you can get this complexity with these glazes. You get these beautiful undertones that I've never been able to really get with another medium. So I see I missed a segment here. Let's just kind of make them all the same. There we go. All right. Let's do that I'm mixing a little bit of my orange, I'm sorry, my green and my brown for these stems. And I'm even letting them kind of flow into the pumpkin. Just like that. This one's dry now, so I can go in and kind of add a little bit of detail there. Dropping in that color. And then for these little vines and squiggles, I'm going to go ahead and use this 6 round. This is a Heritage. You could also use your 6 long round. They've both got really beautiful points on them. So either one will work just perfectly here. And put that green paint on my brush. And then holding my brush very lightly, almost kind of letting it dance, and upright. So you're engaging the tip, and then very, very light pressure. Again, resting my palm on the side here so that I have some stability and moving my wrist. So let's do this one first. And I know these lines can be a little hard. You can always use a green pen or something like that if you just really have a hard time, or even a green watercolor pencil would be fine. And I'm just using the tips. Now, I added a little bit of orange so that some of these vines are just a tiny bit of a different color. Like that. Look how pretty. So interesting, right? And then let's start going in with some of these leaves. So again, we're going to go in with maybe some cad yellow, and let's mix a little bit of brown and do our first wash. This first leaf, I'm going to give you a couple different techniques. So I left some white space in there. What I just did was wet into dry. Now I might pick up some more of that green, maybe with a little bit of that brown. And just tap in. Because this leaf is underneath, I'm going to give it a little bit more darker coloring. Now I'll show you, I'm going to go into this one and use a little different technique. Wash and rinse my brush, and let's do wet and wet on this one. So I'm wetting the area, no puddles, just wetting it so it shines. If I held my paper up and tilted it, it would not drip to the side. So there we go. And then picking up some of that paint. So this is wet and wet is much softer. Almost like a fuzzy type of look, which is very pretty too. I'm going to pick up some of that orange and just tap in. And this is how we did those leaves the other day. Leaves, not leaves. I might even add a little bit of this Prussian blue, just tiny dots of it. And making sure if you do decide to add this Prussian blue in, that you carry that Prussian blue throughout your painting. So maybe we add some here and here. But that Prussian blue is so beautiful in leaves. There we go. Really just play here and have fun with these leaves and let the watercolor do its work. So a little bit different effects there. And we're going to go in and continue to glaze these little pumpkins some more. Wash and rinse my brush, and let's go in with a little bit of yellow and brown. And now wet and dry. Using the tip of this wonderful brush. I really have enjoyed this 6 round as well as the 6 long round. It's got a really nice tip. And I'm laying down this paint. And then while it's wet, I'll go in with maybe my green. Just tap in and let the watercolors spread and do its thing. So you don't necessarily have to do a whole lot here. And this is also going to keep the green color that we used in our vines moving throughout our piece. Maybe just the tiniest bit of orange here and there to carry over the orange of our pumpkins. Just like that. All right. Here's an area too where the other day in our leaves I used some salt. You could certainly do that here too if you wanted that texture. Okay, let's move on. Let's do this leaf here. I think I will do my wet on dry. So I'm going to use a little bit of that yellow mixed with just a tiny bit of the brown, leaving the white space. And thinking about your values too. So right now everything's kind of the same value. That's why we're going to layer. I actually like this more of a yellow here. So I'm going to leave a lot of that yellow. That way this looks like it's a little bit more in the background. Like that. I just used the side of my brush there and kind of went over that. Okay, let's go ahead with our leaves over here. So washing and rinsing my brush. A little bit of, just a tiny, tiny bit of brown. And go in. Now that's a little too saturated, so I'm going to add some water. There we go. And then I want to have some contrast between the pumpkins and this leaf, so I'll go in and add a different color here. This color also, I've got it here, I've got it here, I've got it here. I'll have it here in these little tendrils. So we're moving our eye around the page. Always using color, texture to move your viewer's eye throughout your painting. So I added in just a touch, just some tiny touches of orange. There we go. Now let it spread. And let's see. Let's do this leaf in the back, which I think I'll kind of go for this darker shadowy color. So I believe that was some of that brown. And our cad yellow, you could also use yellow ochre in Winsor Newton. Now I feel like that's going to be pretty dark, so we may have to add some water. So again, I'm using the technique wet on dry, which is going to give us much more defined lines. Now I just went in with just some water. So wet on dry is definitely going to give you crisper lines than wet on wet. So there you go. And we can do this leaf. I'm just going to leave some space in between this one and that one so they don't all flow together. And I'm going to add a little bit more yellow so it matches this one, which is also, okay, see, I forgot myself and I just touched that other leaf. So, and I'll tell you why I'm adding some yellow to this one in just a second here. Now I'm just going in with water to soften some of those edges. And let's see, let's maybe use a little yellow. Like that. The reason I wanted to do that is because I've got this yellow over here. So with this over here, our eye just doesn't stop here. It's going to search for this color, and it's going to go here, and then it's going to go there, and then it's going to go here. So you're keeping your eye moving throughout your beautiful painting. We can add in maybe just a touch of green, something like that, or maybe just a tiny bit of brown. There you go. I'm going to go in now, wash, you don't really have to wash and rinse your brush here because we're using the same colors. I'm going to go in with the tip of my brush and touch in and create these fun little vines, maybe even add a tiny bit of brown to that green, which will tie in the brown I used in the green there. And there we go. Now I really should have done this on those while they were wet, because then you see you get this beautiful blend there, but that's okay. So we've got this fun flow. Even the vines are carrying our eye around our painting. A little bit on the tip and just resting your hand. And I can even add in some orange to that green. And there you go. So our eye is being led in so many different directions. Now the last step I might put on here is wash and rinse my brush and go in with some glazing of different values. So I'm going to pick up that orange, tap off my brush. Actually, let's wash and rinse our brush and get a little bit truer orange there. There we go. But I want it to be not too dark. I do want it to have some transparency. If you're not sure if you have too much water, just tap off on your towel. And remember, anything with the word CAD in it is going to be much more opaque, I believe. So I'm going to go in with the side of my brush, and let's go into this one and create a glaze. Point, and then the side of my brush. Point, and the side of my brush. So I'm getting some different interesting values here. Maybe add a little tiny bit of green. I think could be interesting, so that the whole pumpkin isn't the same color, and maybe these back pieces look like they have some shadow. Definitely these back pieces are going to be darker. But still want that undertone of that orange. And then we will take our orange and our green and shadow in some of these back pieces here using the side of my brush. but I'm making sure to preserve these whites because I think those really help add that brightness. If it's a little too bright for you, you can rinse off some of your paint and go in there and just cover up a tiny bit of that just to soften it. So I'm picking up that yellow side of my brush and just glazing these. So we get some really fun colors. Look at that. Now really the bottom of the pumpkin could use some probably darker colors. Let's see if we can get maybe some green and some of that orange. And we'll push and pull at the bottom. So I'm going to go in here with a line of that shadow color and then wash and rinse my brush and go in and just push and pull. Got a little too much water. And that will give it the effect of a little bit darker shadow on the bottom. Now I can go in and just touch. There we go. You could even tilt your page. If that's too much, you can go in and pick some of that up with just a damp brush. And there you go. I think that's really, really pretty. Just so interesting and fun, isn't it? You could go in and draw in some of these lines, although what I would do is not draw an entire line, like just touch in like that. So you're getting some of the lines. Let's pick up a little bit of brown. And we can pull out some of these lines. You could even use a dark green. Let's find our olive green and our brown. And just start picking out with the tip of our brush. Some of those lines. I'm going to push and pull here, so I added some of that paint and then pull it out. There you go. And this will dry lighter. Maybe we even want to create some of these veins. Just using the tip of my brush again, like that. I really would like to see this leaf in the back a little bit darker, so I'm going to mix some of that orange with my green to get that shadowy color. Tap off my brush, and let's just, now I don't know if you can tell, but I've got an awful lot of paint and water on my brush. Too much, so I just rinsed my brush. And then I'm going in and pulling some of that paint around with just a damp brush. So I like that better. We've got some of the Prussian blue over here, so I might pick up some of that and pull it into this one, just like that. Look how pretty. So now we've got that Prussian blue here, we've got it over here. And you can certainly clean up some of these lines. like that. Yeah, so that kind of pulls it into the background. So we've got different values here. We've got different colors, but yet the colors are moving all around our painting. I feel like this pumpkin in the back could have just a tiny bit more coloring. So I'm going to pick up some of that orange with maybe some brown and create some shadow here. Like that. And then wash and rinse my brush and feather that out. There we go. Maybe even a tiny bit of that blue down here. Now, if that's too much, I can go in and wash and rinse my brush and pick some of that up. No need to panic. And there you go. I think we're about done. I'm adding in tiny bits of blue in here because I feel like these areas are going to be darker. And there you go. I've got a lot of orange here, so there's a part of me that wants to bring our eye over here with some more orange. So I just picked up a watery version of that orange, and I'm going to just glaze this a little bit. So now, see what that did? Our eye kind of stopped here because of that orange, and now it tends to move over to here. So that's real important in your paintings to have that, so you don't have everything in one side, weighted on one side with whether it's a color or an element. You want to keep your eye traveling, yellow, 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 orange, orange, orange. So your eye is moving. All right, everybody, I think that's it. I will put this tutorial kit with the drawing and colors and some instructions for you. And I think this came out very nice. We could always go in and, you know, darken a few of the leaves if you really wanted to with a dark value. Let me just give you a for instance here. If I darkened this even more, I'm just kind of playing now. Look what happens to the entire painting. The entire painting changes, doesn't it? That leaf now went way back in there. I could do the same with this one. Just darkening it, and all of a sudden, that leaf falls back into the background and gives you this feeling of depth. So those are some of the ways to play with your values, you know, in here. It gives you the feeling that stem is coming down inside the pumpkin. So there you go. There's some fun things. If this is too dark, you can always pick some of that up. Wash and rinse your brush. Something like that. Just to give it a little bit of interest. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. And I will list all my supplies in the description. Thanks, everybody.